We can't always fight nature, John. We can't fight change. Can't fight gravity. We can't fight nothing. My whole life, all I ever did was fight. When I'm gone, they'll just find another monster. They have to.
We all get caught eventually, John. I guess the trick is to decide by who.
In the sun-soaked expanse of Mexico, the year unfolds as 1911, weaving an epic tapestry of redemption and unwavering resolve. John Marston, a man etched with the scars of a turbulent past and a damning history to say the least, embarks on a quest that transcends borders and delves into the very essence of humanity. The pursuit, Marston's pursuit, the very reason why he's venturing into this unfamiliar territory centers on two figures from Marston's tumultuous past. The elusive outlaw, known as Bill Williamson, once a former brothers in arms, turned fugitive seeking solace in the vibrant landscapes of Nuevo Paraíso, a region that none other than Javier Escuela, another kindred spirit from the infamous Vanderlyn gang who calls this area his home, are out hiding in. Nuevo Paraíso, a name that conjures visions of a new paradise, is anything but. It becomes the backdrop for a complex dance between loyalty and survival, between what is right and who deserves a second chance, not just at redemption, but just at being given the luxury to breathe another day.
I hope you have a clear conscience, because you're about to meet God.
Nuevo Paraíso is a region that is suffering its own hardships. The land, the people, are in the midst of a civil war. And as Williamson seeks refuge beneath the protective wings of Escuela, in a region where the arm of U.S. jurisdiction loses its grip, it becomes a gamble, fueled by the camaraderie forged in the crucible of outlaw life, and a testament to the bonds that endure even in the face of betrayal. In the heart of Mexico, where the sun kisses the earth with golden hues, Marston's journey unveils the complex interplay of morality and survival. The narrative becomes a profound exploration, beckoning us to ponder the depths to which one man is willing to plunge for the ones he cherishes. The relentless pursuits of justice morphs into a sublime journey through the intricate tapestry of love, loss, and the uncharted territories of the human soul. The chapter of Mexico in the original Red Dead Redemption has to be one of the most critical portions in that game, especially when it comes to the overall character development of John Marston. The entire chapter perfectly exemplifies that John is always meant to be a morally gray character. There is no right, there is no wrong. That past he tries so desperately to shed often shines through his actions, because while he's striving to live a different life, to turn over a new leaf, to redeem himself, the means that he employs in order to reach the ultimate end, no matter how noble, no matter how justified, no matter how beautiful that end is, the means are always originating from a life that he tries so hard to leave. In a way, it's almost the exact reason Abigail gives him so much shit for in the epilogue of the second game. He's trying to achieve another way of living for himself, an honest life, an honest way of living, one that frankly isn't even possible without his wife and son, who have been taken from him. Undoubtedly a factor in the level of sheer no fucks given to everyone else in the process of trying to capture Bill and Javier. Now, I've already tackled the stress, anger, and most likely level of brooding John must have been going through in another video, so I'm not really going to be discussing that as a factor here. Rather, I want to get into what went down in Mexico, how John got played and used by both sides of the Civil War, killing rebels that he was told were bandits, contributing to John helping the corrupt Mexican army tighten its grip on the entire region, and as a result, flood the bedroom of Colonel Allende with sex slaves, women who had the sole purpose of serving him, but was described as being recruits that were serving Mexico, or killing any form of Mexican law enforcement in the name of a rebel leader who's seen as a true savior, a proper warrior against any form of corruption, an honest man for the people who, when in power, would do right by all the peasants and see to a free and prosperous Mexico, when in reality, that man everyone looked up to, a man by the name of Abraham Reyes, just lusts after women in power and eternal fame, no different than any other tyrant who has soiled the throne of Mexico before him.
Do you have any idea how many times I've thought about the day I will march into Escalera and storm Allende's mansion?
I think I have some idea.
Soon it will be me sleeping on those silk sheets.
What about the Chinese workers here? I hear you ain't exactly made them very welcome.
That is different. They are an inferior race.
You have all the makings of a great leader, Abraham.
After a somewhat successful assault launched on Fort Mercer, John and his ragtag gang of local law enforcement, Nigel West Dickens, a snake oil salesman, and a grave robber by the name of Seth, while they accomplished in taking over the fort, they had no luck in actually apprehending Bill Williamson, the gang's leader and the target of John Marston. It was a bandit that was left behind that revealed to the group Bill had disappeared into Mexico in an area near a village by the name of Chuparosa the day before.
Mr. Marston, we got a live one. He says, Bill's already run off to Mexico yesterday morning.
You'll never get him.
Javier Escuela. He's gone to see Javier Escuela. That should make things interesting. Where in Mexico?
How should I know? Oh! Where in Mexico, you legit? Someplace near Chuparosa, I think he said.
Embarking on a raft to cross into Mexico, John Marston and his guide, a man known as Irish, find themselves in a dangerous situation. You see, Irish's past encounter with the Mexican locals leads to gunfire being directed at Marston and Irish as they navigate their way across the river from the United States into Mexico. This causes John to be knocked off course on where he was originally supposed to be entering the country, but nonetheless, the initial introduction to the locals through Irish did not leave a favorable first impression, to say the least. Now, given Irish's dubious character and his inability to accurately recall his last visit to Mexico, or even the individuals he encountered before, skepticism on this just being a fluke was warranted. It's only when John ventures into the village of Chuparosa that he experiences a genuine face-to-face interaction with the locals.
Habla English?
Oh, sí, gringo. Hablo mucho inglés. Sí. Hablo filthy fucking bean eater. Hablo slippery little Mexican. Hablo little piece of shit. ¿Comprende, amigo? ¿Comprende? Hey, what are you doing here, gringo? I don't remember inviting you to my country.
I don't think you did, amigo. I mean you no harm.
You mean us no harm? This is funny. What harm could you do to us exactly?
Nothing, amigo.
I've always found this entire interaction fascinating. Some argue that it marks one of John's more ruthless moments, killing 3 people over something as simple as a hat. Personally, I see it differently. While I can't say he was entirely justified in taking those lives, the tension escalates rapidly as one man passionately repeats what Americans saw as Mexican stereotypes and expresses personal or collective hatred that he or the other 2 have most likely experienced. This not only sets the stage for the prevalent American sentiment towards Mexicans at the time, but also underscores the emotional intensity of this particular situation. It's not as simple as saying John killed over a hat. In reality, John was deliberately being robbed and intimidated. The way this man spoke to him created a sense that in his eyes, the tables had finally turned, and he was going to make John pay for everything he and the other 2 possibly had to endure. And it was because of that, I'd say John was compelled to respond. It's a complex scenario where the dynamics of power and emotion converge, leading to an outcome that was far from being merely about a piece of clothing. I just wanted to point that out because claiming John killed some peasants over a hat appears to me to be willingly ignorant of what these 3 armed men were intentionally doing. If we throw on top of this of how John was welcomed into the country through a hail of bullets, one could almost forgive him for being so callous. But this is where John's path somewhat diverges. Here in the town of Chuparosa, immediately after killing these 3 men, John meets the famous gunslinger Landon Ricketts. Known for his incredible speed, Landon has opted for a life of silence, leaving behind his gunslinging days and becoming the unofficial protector of the people of Chuparosa. During his time with Ricketts, John improves his shooting capabilities, which in-game transfers into a better version of Deadeye, allowing the player to paint multiple targets before firing. But John is also introduced to the side of the rebels in the civil war that's currently ravaging this region. By proxy, anyways. John can almost immediately do missions following Ricketts, the rebels, and helping the Mexican government, with the rebels and the Mexican government obviously being opposing sides. But for now, we're just going to be following what he does with Ricketts and how that leads into some of the things that he's doing for the rebels. But just keep in mind, while doing the missions with Ricketts and with some of the rebels, he's also in the background doing missions for the Mexican army, which can get a little confusing. But now that we got that confusion out of the way, Landon Ricketts and John Marston together team up freeing a woman that's a relative of one of Ricketts' informants. Simply known by the name Emilio, his sister, Luisa, was taken by the Mexican army, as she is identified as being a woman who was close to Abraham Reyes, the leader of the rebel army that the Mexican army is trying desperately to stomp out. Luisa herself turns out to be a very passionate revolutionary. Coming from a background of peasantry, she firmly believes in the vision of Abraham Reyes, who promises a fair and free Mexico for the people who have been oppressed by the Mexican government for far too long. Now, I don't want to pay too much time in this, but Luisa herself almost immediately contradicts the nature of Abraham Reyes, because from the very start she mentions that she's going to be marrying Abraham and she idolizes this man and he's everything that Mexico needs. And then when you meet Abraham, you realize that not only can he not remember Luisa's name, but he has no intentions of even marrying her. His focus is primarily on achieving the status of the next president of Mexico.
She thinks she's your wife.
My wife? These peasant girls, they believe every word a fellow says. So naive. It's really quite charming. I love peasants. Don't you love peasants? I love them. They have such purity.
Are you gonna marry her?
Ha! Marry a peasant? My dear boy, don't be absurd. I'm going to be the next president of Mexico. My wife will meet ambassadors, kings, other great men. The very thought that I would marry some peasant girl with a tight gun and the hands of a farmer, well, I really don't think so. My mother, que Dios la cuide, would turn in her grave.
Which in some ways almost immediately betrays that even though the Mexican army is doing some horrible shit and is committing human trafficking for Colonel Allende, Abraham Reyes technically is no better. You're almost immediately presented with the idea of the lesser of two evils here. Even John catches on to it himself, with quite a bit of dialogue calling Reyes out on what he would do with the power he obtains, and what kind of leader he would be. John even sarcastically remarks to him to never change. But regardless of John's own position on Reyes and his love life and how he could just be using his potential rise to the head of the Mexican government for a little extra side action, Reyes does deliver on the one thing that the opposing side never had the intention of fulfilling, and that is handing Javier Escuela and Bill Williamson over to John Marston. You see, if we rewind a little bit, while John is learning the ins and outs of finer gunslinging with Landon Ricketts out in Chuparosa, he finds some time to make a trip over to the town of Escalera, the capital of the region in Nuevo Paradiso and the headquarters of Colonel Allende, the governor of the region and head of the local Mexican forces. Unfortunately, Marston doesn't make contact with Allende at first and is instead received by his subordinate Vicente de Santa, who pounces on this opportunity to use John as a valuable asset. John is here in the country to capture two men that are hiding out in the region, a region that De Santa tells him is running rampant with bandits, scum, and untamed land.
Outlaws seek each other. They're possibly hiding with thieves and killers who pose as freedom fighters in the hills around here. They're united under one traitor named Abraham Reyes.
Where could I find this Reyes?
If I knew, I would be there, hunting him with everything that is true within me. Reyes finds you.
Like cholera.
De Santa actually uses this opportunity very nicely to mix in bandits and outlaws with rebels, painting Abraham Reyes as the head of bandit country. But nonetheless, John here makes no alliances to either the rebels or the local government. Rather, he chooses to work both sides in what could be seen as a desperate yet morally bankrupt attempt to capture these two no matter the cost. We don't know it yet. It's revealed much later after Allende and De Santa used John to stomp out the rebels, but Bill and Javier were actually in the protective custody of Allende this whole time. John, none the wiser, decides to strike a quote-unquote deal where he would help De Santa and the Mexican army to tame the bandits, to go after this murderer Abraham Reyes. Reyes is actually first heard of through DeSanta, even though later on our direct contact with Reyes is a result of John taking a liking to Luisa and saving him at her request. I already touched on Reyes' character and questionable reasons behind wanting power, but it's while fighting for the rebels that John really doesn't do anything that puts a microscope on his character, and having us as players questioning whether if John saving his family justifies what he's doing. If anything, it's actually the contrary. John is going after the Mexican army and its leadership that not only lied to him, betrayed him, and then tried to kill him, all after using him to wipe out villages of refugees, forcing its occupants into captivity.
I heard the little oars crying in that house over there. Remember, nobody takes them before Allende.
We did all this just to get women for Allende?
No, that's just a bonus. This village is riddled with rebels. Make sure they don't have homes to come back to. There are fire bottles over there. Use them to burn down some of these houses.
And what makes you think I'd do that?
You want to find Javier Escuela, don't you? John, you're helping Mexico. Vámonos, muchachos. Buen trabajo.
Placing women straight into the bedroom of Colonel Allende, and even wiping out an entire rebel outpost where those that surrendered were just shot rather than just taken as prisoners of war. John's entire time working for the Mexican army was just filled with questionable things, and these are things that I think in hindsight leads to a little bit of a flaw in the mission system of Red Dead Redemption. Going back, there can be some contradictions or even a little bit of confusion when it comes to the timeline. Now, originally I considered it a problem, but that's because I was looking at it in a very linear way. Here's John supporting one side, and here's John supporting another side. Mexican army versus the rebels. However, during the time that John is working with Landon, you're pushed a little bit more into the gray area. This is the one time where John is actually put in his own place by Landon himself. Landon is aware as to why John is here in this country. John admits that he's here looking for people, but in his own fashion, he doesn't give up the exact details. Landon Ricketts is all too familiar with what game he's playing, and he constantly does tell him that he can't keep jumping from side to side.
Perhaps you would know. Rumor has it you've been making all kinds of new friends.
I don't pay much attention to
Just
rumors.
be careful, John. Keep jumping from one side of the fence to the other, you might just get impaled on it.
Or eventually he's gonna get impaled on that fence. Now while working with Landon, he sticks very close to Chuparosa, so you're only confined to a small space. You're not really delving into the garbage or fighting for the Mexican army yet, but you are exposed to some of their doings, like capturing Luisa or condemning these innocent people to death that you have to save, and intercepting a military convoy because of that. Meanwhile, on the same token, during Landon Ricketts' missions, you do have to save a wagon from some actual bandits. So you're kind of just eased into the whole territory of Mexico. I wish the whole timeline was structured a little bit better, where you just had to complete all of Landon Ricketts' missions first, pushed into doing all of Allende's and DeSanta's missions, and then you were introduced to Luisa and then Reyes, because it would have made a lot more sense that way chronologically, rather than this little mix-up of going from Allende to Luisa to Ricketts, back to DeSanta and Allende, where then you're betrayed, going to Luisa, having Reyes save you, and then siding with Reyes, who decided to forgive John and all of his wrongdoings in the country and all his actions and efforts against the rebellion, because he saved his life and he's now fighting for him and realizes how valuable of an asset he really is on his side. It becomes confusing, or it could be just what Rockstar was really going for. You know, John jumping from side to side to side, causing pretty much chaos regardless of whoever's he's fighting for or against at any given moment. And he's just a man on a mission that no matter the side, he does see through to the end. Ultimately, it's hard to say if John did do better or worse for the land of Mexico. He of course ended up killing all the local heads of government. With his help, he ensured Colonel Allende and DeSanta were killed either by his own hands or by rebel forces. John ended up killing Captain Espinosa and seeing to it that Abraham Reyes was in charge of the region Nuevo Perrizo, with Javier Escuela and Bill Williamson either killed or captured. So for John, it's a resounding mission accomplished. But what of all the lives he directly had a hand in affecting? Yes, he did save some lives with the help of Landon Ricketts, ensuring some people made their way into the United States. He did turn the tide of the civil war that was ravaging the area, but he also did contribute to an untold number of deaths. Who knows how many people were sold as sex slaves? Who knows how many people were up and relocated and had to move because of the mess John was bringing to their doorstep. You can't deny he had an impact on the region. Without his help, the rebellion would have died along with Abraham Reyes, who, thanks to John's help, goes on to achieve the status of president, but it's claimed that he becomes much more brutal in his ways of running the country than any other leader before him. Of course, letting the power get to his head that John even warned him about. All things considered, Rockstar in a way did a phenomenal job at portraying the moral gray area of John Marston during this entire chapter. But in order to get his wife and son back, was it really worth getting involved in a civil war? Toppling the pre-existing institution of power, he may say he cared little for the land or the people, with his family being his primary and really only concern, but would that not be the ultimate form of selfishness? John reshaped the history of an entire region, and of the entire nation, all for his dream of being left alone to solitude, and passing into his old age with his wife by his side. Something we can all relate to, but is that dream so grand as to excuse all that he did?